Alright guys, for today's homework, we're going to do a lot of the functions that we've already learned. But what I'm going to do is have it so you guys have to put it together. So each function we're going to separate into separate functions. Every time you read a cell, I want that to be a separate function. Read another cell, another function. Calculate the total, another function. And write out to the cell, another function. Now you should have most of this stuff here in your notes, but if not, I'll give you some quick example code at the end of this. For the way the program is actually supposed to run, I have one here that I wrote, and I'm inputting my P2 cell as input 1, Q2 cell as input 2, and when I run the Python program, what it's going to do is do a one-time loop to input that cell, input the second cell, do a calculate that's going to add the two together, and then it's going to write to cell. So it should write out the total of P2 plus Q2 will be put into R2. So let's execute this. You can see how it goes. I also have some write to screen in each function just so we can track what the program is doing as it progresses. So the first thing that should happen is it starts it off, reads, calculates, and then it writes. And then at the end it just says complete. So I'd like to have yours all say that. So just to go back and review. So line 1 there, you see it printed it out just I. So we're doing I have I starting at 1, and while I is less than 2, continue. That's how we get our single loop. And then within the first function, you have a print a screen that says I made it to read input 1 function. Then it goes back to the loop and it goes and calls a second function, and that's where we have another print a screen. I made it to the read input 2 function. Then it goes back to the loop and then it's calling out to the calculate. It does the calculation, sends the total back to the loop, and then it calls a write function. So in total we're going to have 4 functions, and I'll show that in the next screen. But in that write function is when we have the output to R2, and it says I made it to the write function. And then right there as it ends, before the program actually completes, it just writes out to the screen, says complete. You can say goodbye, you can say I'm done, whatever you want to say there. Just I want to make sure we have 4 outputs from those different functions, as well as the print in the beginning of your loop counter. So that's it for this. Let's go and show some code example. All right, so here we have some example code. Notice all the code that I have here is not all the code that you're going to need. So part of your homework is you need to fill in the blanks here. So as we mentioned before during class last week, all the stuff here at the top, this all stays the same. Notice that I'm importing my sheet as that coach test worksheet, okay? All right, so in our loop, like I had mentioned, is I just did a single loop, so I equals 1. And then while I said I is less than 2, print I. So we're only going to loop once here. So basically we're just going to read it, read the second one, do your calculation, write it out, and your homework's done. Okay, but I want you to make sure you're printing out to the line. So out to the console, this will be that print 1. Okay. So input 1. Now I know you guys have gone over how to call a function, so I'm not showing you how to do that right here. Okay, it should be in your notes. We went over it in class last week. But once we hit input 1, it's going to go up to this function that I have labeled input 1, so you should know how to call it. And the first thing it's going to do is print to the line, I made it to read input 1 function. And then just for the sake of timing, I have it set up to do a sleep of 1 second. Now I'm naming input 1 as a float. I think we've gone over this before. Remember, we have strings, integers, and floats. Floats are our real numbers, so we're able to have decimal points if we want them. Okay, mysheet.get P2, because you saw on my spreadsheet there, the cell that I'm inputting is P2, and I'll bring that over here just so we can see this again. Okay, so since we have input equals float, my sheet, so it comes up to the my sheet, get, so I'm reading the value of P2, so that's going to be 5 here, okay? And then it sends it back to the loop, it's returning input 1. If you recall, remember the return means it can send that variable back to the loop. So input 2 is the next thing that happens. We're going to call input 2, and we're saying input 2 equals your function that you're going to have to fill in right here. Okay, then it's going to call a function of input 2. Notice I don't have that function here. It's something you guys need to fill in for your homework. Essentially, it's going to be the same thing. But this time, instead of calling P2, I want to call Q2. Okay, now notice everybody else has their own group, so you'll have to call your specific column and your specific row to do your calculations. As you notice, this 350 is still in here from when I did my write out last time. So let's jump back to the code. So after I input 2, I'm going to return 1 and 2, as you see right here. In the next line, it's going to call total equals calculate. So your function for calculation, remember, we're going to make our variable total equals whatever's returned from the calculate function. But since we're calling this calculate function with our variables that we've input from these other two functions, we need to make sure to send input 1 and input 2. Remember, this is how we send variables to the other functions. So if we jump up here to our calculate function, notice as we set up our calculate function, it's accepting input 1. Say we have input 1, and it is accepting input 2 and input 2. Make sure you do the commas and proper syntax here. Okay, so then I simply wrote the comment of calculate the 2, and this is where you're going to add your code. So essentially, this should be total equals the 2 of our variables added up. If you would like to add them, you can choose to add. If you want to multiply, you can multiply. If you want to divide, you can divide. I'll leave that up to you. I just need to make sure that you're doing some type of a calculation here. And then that is going to be this total. So the variable, so it should be total equals something. Do your calculation. And then I'm returning total. So total comes back down here to my program loop. And then I'm going to call the write cell function. And I'm sending it the variable of total. Since total came back from my calculate function, I'm now sending the total variable back up. So I'm coming up to my write cell function. And if we notice, bring this back over here again, my write cell is supposed to write to R2. Yours will be different because you each have a separate group on this spreadsheet. Okay? So notice I'm just doing a simple print. I made it to the right function. Need to make sure that's in there. Use proper syntax for both your function calls as well as your printing and your sleeping. Again, just go over real quick the time.sleep 1 second. You need to make sure to remember to import time. If you go off of what we were working on at the last class, you should be able to open that and save as and just change your name to, let's say, G Sheets Homework 1, for example, as you see I have here. And that way you'll be able to keep all this stuff up from the top. You don't have to rewrite any of that. Okay, so notice coming back here to my write cell function, I'm accepting my total variable. And then, like I said, print out, I made it to the right function, so it's going to print out to your console, sleeping for 1 second. And this here again is where I'm updating my sheet. So your my sheet is this worksheet for Google Sheets. Write to my sheet, update this particular cell, and I'm updating R2, as I had mentioned, R2. And within R2, I'm writing my variable of total. Okay, there's nothing to return off of this, so as soon as this function is complete, it jumps back down to here. Then the next line is my print. It prints complete, and that's the end of the program. So that is homework 1 for this week, and hopefully that should be pretty clear.